Let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
We were supposed to do something last week or during the middle of the week in connection with or about these mass shootings. We touched on it last week. Um, these mass shootings and this white privilege that these shooters, because they caught a couple, they thwarted a couple more.
It's more than a couple. It's more than a couple.
It's
it's a consistent thing. I do want to. I will shift gears, but not necessarily to that part. Well, we can actually talk about. I want to try to mold both of the conversations that I wanted to have in mind. There are a number of events. Our last topic last week was about establishing political expectations that follow the reality of Black people being harmed by police. We had a lengthy discussion about whether or not we should be supporting whether or not gun control, which is being posited as a solution, should also apply to the state as well. We know that ICE agents are taking people from the car. We saw one video where they smashed a window in to get a guy out of the car. I think that was in Minnesota or something.
They ran over some protesters.
As well.
Yes.
And it's consistent violence, and that's not even going into the violence that takes place when they're actually kidnapping people on the first day of school, so that a whole bunch of children can be orphaned. There was one case I was telling you about where I think it was a 7-year-old boy. He was taken from his loving father. His father was deported. His son was put into the foster system, and inside the foster system, he was sexually molested repeatedly. Herschel. Again, this is the violent reality that we're dealing with, but it's a reality that's circumscribed and that's established and executed with the understanding that state violence is both legitimate and state violence has impunity. I think that if we're going to be critical about Black people being shot by the police, if we're going to be critical about how traffic stops go, if we're going to be critical about the racism endemic to policing and to policing from the FBI on down to ICE agents and CBP agents, if we're going to be critical about that, we have to extend our criticism to the assumption that some of this political power is being afforded by the level of violence we let them have. So part of demilitarization actually has to mean that we should be seeking to some level, and probably to an absolute level, in my opinion, the disarmament of cops. And again, we really should. I'm sorry, I understand what people's complaints and objections are, but one thing I said has actually gotten a little bit of attention at the Washington Post. I mentioned I mentioned briefly a study that was done in New York that showed crime drops astronomically higher than would be attained with police presence. And all they had to do was make the lights and streets brighter and housing developments, Herschel. That's all they had to do.
Oh, okay.
Now, if we're looking at this as if we're looking at crime as a reactive issue, and we have to be very clear that one of the reasons why
reactive and relative.
One of the reasons why law enforcement is reactive is because it's not actually about crime; it's about ethnic population control. There's a problem. People have problems when we have too many freedoms. When we're too free, there's a lot of suspicion that's accorded to that, and part of what prevents that suspicion is the fact that our communities are over policed. It's part of how mayors, how attorney generals, how district attorneys, an increased law enforcement presence means more jobs for them. It means that they're making their communities safer. That's a euphemism for fascist enforcement inside our communities. And I actually want to read a quote because the current attorney general, the top law enforcement of the nation, Attorney General Barr. He gave a speech to the Fraternal Order of Police. And I just want to read part of the speech. He said, and I quote, "Even in a healthy society, violence, lawlessness, and predation lie just below the surface. In the final analysis, what stands between chaos and carnage on the one hand and a civilized and tranquil society we all yearn for on the other is the thin blue line of law enforcement. You are the ones manning the ramparts, day in and day out." He also said something else. He said, one reason for this is that law enforcement is fighting a different type of war. We are fighting an unrelenting, never-ending fight against criminal predators in our society. While there are battles won and lost each day, there is never a final resolution. A final victory is never in sight. Now, this is the Attorney General in a speech to the Fraternal Order of Police. In a speech where he compared the police to Iraq war veterans, despite the fact that police are civilians. This isn't a speech. So we have to realize that when we are internalizing narratives about crime or about the inherent lawlessness of society without a baton up our butts, when we're internalizing those narratives, we're actually supporting the arguments that allow fascist police departments to exist. And one of the consequences of that quote unquote distrust is very visible in a place that also had its own event in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, a lot of people don't know this. I'm actually not going to talk about what happened in Philadelphia because we really don't know. I've heard and seen a number of things. I've heard and seen a number of different things that would make me question at least part of the story. But one thing that we do know that the mayor bombed the black neighborhood. We know that the police agreed to that bombing. We know that almost 40 homes were burned because they told the fire department to not do anything when they bombed that neighborhood in the 1980s. We know that Ed Rendell, one of the governors and a current Joe Biden supporter, we know that he was a district attorney at the time, and that he was one of the people in the mayor's inner circle that actually approved of that bombing. We know that this is how we know there's a police helicopter that the bomb came from. We know that the FBI supplied the bomb. We know this is a fact. They did this to bomb black people.
They did this to
bomb.
So people that don't know about
it, just look up Move in Philadelphia. Gene Demby at the NPR, he has an excellent expose about that he wrote in I think 2015. But this is the reality of policing, and this is the reality of police violence. And so long as that's our reality, we shouldn't actually support the violence that they're allowed to express and impose. And we should also note, and we should also acknowledge, like I'm doing, we should also acknowledge research that shows that we don't actually need policing in order to lower quote unquote crime rates.
The problem with your solution is this: this country was founded by criminals. It was founded in violence. It's in the DNA of this country. Now, you go to Canada, they got more guns than we got. There's a different culture. Here's my problem with what you say. Here's my problem. It's not going to change the mentality, because even if they don't have guns, they'll be beating people to death. They'll be hanging people like they used to do. Okay? Second of all, if I'm in a state that has no Second Amendment right for me to bear arms, and a criminal element, whether it be black or white, that comes to my home, I have no way to defend my home.
I will note that, and I'm not drawing an equivalence here, but I do think that it should be noted that the NRA makes this a case in precisely those terms, that we require.
I'm a member of the NRA.
I wouldn't be proud of. I wouldn't be.
Listen.
Again, the NRA. A part of the NRA's remit, particularly since its redesign after the Panthers, is that it uses the fear of black and brown criminality to sell guns on behalf of gun manufacturers. Yeah. The arguments that they use are arguments that inflate the possibility of violence. And I think that it's actually useful to note that violence has gone down globally. By precipitous degrees. It's gone down 30, 40, 50, including here. Violence has gone down astronomically. Gun rates and homicide rates are we've never seen the level of lower crime that we're seeing in the period now. And researchers are starting to look into why. Here's one of the interesting factors, Herschel. One of the reasons that they're noting is that lead regulation is part of the reason why crime has gone down. Some people are attributing Kevin Drum at Mother Jones. He attributes the increase in violence from the 80s and the 90s not to people just becoming more violent and more evil, but to the fact that lead was in the paint, lead was in the gasoline, lead was concentrated in poor neighborhoods and housing developments and communities, and because lead was unregulated and underregulated, children ended up getting exposed to that. And we know that one of the effects of lead exposure, and we can see this in places where it's in the water as well, like in Flint and Newark and elsewhere. One of the consequences of lead exposure at an early age is that you have minimized impulse, you have increased aggression and minimized impulse control. After that got regulated, violence dropped precipitously, and it got regulated in multiple places at the same time. So it got regulated in Europe, it got regulated in Canada, and it got regulated here. Now, this hasn't been 100% proven, but the evidence is highly suggestive that, again, the reason why crime rates have lowered isn't because of increased police presence. It's because of regulatory factors that have to do with infrastructure. And if we want to stop crime, we should stop crime through community investment and through infrastructural investment and through preventative and preemptive measures instead of punitive reactive ones. And that's all the police can be, is punitive and reactive. I also think that guns act as a fatal threat magnifier. So even though you're entirely correct that police will use batons or whatever else they have, the level of ease and the level of impunity and the amount of people that they can kill, which is almost up to their yearly average is they kill about 1,000 people a year. That would be much harder to achieve. It would require more numbers for them to achieve if they did not have guns. So we should be using this as a measure to both be critical of what force means in a law enforcement context and be critical of what crime is and what actually prevents crime.
I'm going to look up those stats.
No.
Because what I'm saying is this. Because I know for a fact, and we've had this argument, because the data that's collected is collected, and you've even tried to look up some stats of prisons or jails, local jails, and we couldn't get any stats.
Yeah.
Because they're being skewed. You go to Chicago.
No, that's not being measured at all. Just like police,
let me explain something.
Just like homicidal police are being measured.
Homicide. The numbers are being skewed.
No, they're not. Police departments are not obliged to actually measure who kills who. That's actually being compiled by journalists.
And then if they're not, Antoine, I'm telling you, you can go to any major city in some of these smaller cities, and they're underreporting or they're not reporting and they're not recording. I have tried to find people that I know that were killed. I told you this before, and I know it's not an anomaly. Just like we did the Whitehurst case. We interviewed the Whitehurst family. Their husband, you were there when she told us, was embalmed before they got to him. You know, these are things that are not reported, they're not recorded, but it's not the first nor the last. So the same way, people are getting disappeared, people are dying, and it's not being reported.
Whitehurst was killed by law enforcement.
And that's my point.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, they didn't report. I mean, things went on, but they embalmed him and tried to cover it up, right? Now, his was one of a few that was uncovered. His was one of a few that, the truth came out. Still, nobody was held accountable. But the truth came out. Do you think he was the last man that was embalmed before his family got their body back? No. You think he was the first? So again,
how was he killed, Herschel? You can't. If somebody's running the opposite direction to you, it's really hard to chase them down with a stick, Herschel. But it's easier to shoot them.
But they know who he was.
So again, the problem is twofold. The problem is that
my argument is not for more police. My argument is
I'm arguing for disarm police.
I don't know
what's the argument for arming them? I suppose is my question to you.
Well, arming them with military grade weapons.
No, arming them at all. What's the argument for arming them? Because we both agree here that the police act as a white supremacist, act in a white supremacist role. We agree that they serve the functions of a white supremacist state. We agree that function is served as ethnic population control that disproportionately falls against brown and black people, against people of color. If that's the case, why do we want them to be better armed? How do we benefit from them being better armed?
Well, again, we need to arm ourselves.
No, that's not my question. How do we benefit from the police being better armed? Do we?
If I need backup, just like wait a minute, even when I was running the streets, I didn't call for you, Antoine, because you ain't got no gun. I called for him because I know he bringing the heat. I need backup. I can't handle it myself. So if I call,
that's an argument for police, though. That's an argument for you can get that same arrangement, and you talked about this before through neighborhood watch, through collective self-defense.
Then we need to, you need to buy into that. But you need to buy. But we need everybody to buy in. We need to buy.
Again. My argument is very specific and very directed. What is the argument for police having arms if we know that police armament is going to be used disparagingly against us? We know that they use tasers against us. We know that any equipment that we can have is going to be disproportionately used against black and brown people and the mentally ill. If that is the case, what is the case for them having arms? And why should they be trusted with arms? And if the answer is that they can't be trusted with arms, we need to take that to its logical conclusion. That needs to be politicized. It needs to be operationalized. And my operationalization of that conclusion is that, okay, if I don't trust the police with this, then why am I trusting them with guns, period? Because those guns are taxpayer funded. There's no reason for me to pay for their guns, so there's no reason for me to pay taxpayer money for them to kill me.
Again, we talk about doing more than one thing. You want to disarm the police, you have to have something in place.
No, you don't. You really don't. You really don't. Okay. Again, if police are the enemies of black people, police are act as the enemies of black people that keep us in segregated conditions and violent conditions. Why would you let your enemy have better tools? Why would you let your enemy have more tools? No. What is the argument for? Again, I just want a direct argument. What is the direct argument?
It's going to be without law enforcement. Some people are not doing stuff because the fact, okay, there's cops. Now with them going, it's basically like, well, might as well just be the purge. All crime is legal because the cops ain't gonna do nothing. They don't have nothing to go. They won't have any, like, what you call it, anything to counter their attacks.
Okay, and yeah, you know what? If
you're taking away weapons just from them,
you know. I think there's two responses. The first response is that in some ways that's already the condition that a lot of black neighborhoods and black people live in. We already live in conditions where we know and expect that if something happens in our neighborhood, the police aren't really going to do anything about it except for beat people up that are unrelated to the case. The other part of that is that I think that we overestimate the degree of lawlessness and violence that's both endemic to human nature and endemic to our neighborhoods. I don't think that the consequence of disarming the police will be that we'll just run rampant. I think that
I'm worried about people coming from outside of my community. I'm not worried about the people inside.
I'll respond to that as well, but I just wanted to finish this point. I think that our concerns about unfettered crime are effectively concerns about the lack of resources in our community. Because the reason why we have drug dealers and whatnot in our community is because job programs are gone, is because stores are closed down, it's because we can't get business loans for our communities, it's because we don't have anything in place that acts as an alternative. So we move to elements that lack that same degree of societal legitimacy and acceptance. And I think the answer to that isn't ensuring that police are armed. It's ensuring that black people have jobs. It's ensuring that black people have available jobs and resources and options that are available to them that are outside of what would be deemed illegitimate. And my response to you, what did you say, Herschel? You said something. I was going to respond to that. Oh, your response is elements outside your community. Again, if we agree that the police forces are a white nationalist force, police forces are that element outside your community. So there's no reason for us to agree to them having arms. Again, we've seen in protests like Charlottesville and protests in Portland, we've seen police actually defend white supremacist groups. We've seen them defend neo-Nazis. We've seen them defend and work alongside people who have our worst interests at heart. If a gun law happens, that law is going to be disproportionately concentrated on us by armed cops. So my argument is very, very simple. If we agree that police act as a fatal element in our communities, if we agree that police act as an aggregator of negative effects in our communities, then we should also agree that giving a group that has that is antagonistic to our interests better equipment to actually impose their will on us doesn't make any sense.
Is it a group or is it a system?
Because it's both.
Because one thing,
a system requires a group.
Let me tell you something, and I hear you, and I'm not going to condemn all police. I'm not. You can say what you want. I'm not. You can say what you want. I've had very bad experiences with cops, and I've had some very good ones. So I'm not because that's the same bull crap that they say about black people.
No, it's really not. Policing is an elected profession. It's a career. You can choose not to be a career, but you can't choose not to be black.
And that's why this is what I tell you what. You have a right to believe what you want to believe.
I'm making logical arguments.
You're making it's logical to you.
I'm making.
No. Let me ask you this. Okay, so if something happens at your house, you're just not gonna call anybody. You'll deal with it yourself.
It depends on what happens.
Hell no. You just said that. No.
I'm not gonna call the police.
Okay, that's what
You just stop what you asked. You said I wouldn't call anybody. I'm not gonna call the police. No.
You're not gonna call the police.
No.
Or the fire department.
Fire department is not law enforcement. It's not. It's
Oh,
not.
It's the
It's
same
not.
system.
No, it's not.
It's the same.
No,
Okay.
firefighters are not law enforcement. They're not police.
Okay, they can enforce the law. Some of them do carry guns.
Okay, again,
Some of them do.
firefighters are not police.
Okay, so you'll call the fire department, but you wouldn't call the police.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I tell you what, I've called them, and when I call them, knock on wood, whatever you want to call it. I'm not Antoine. I hear you, but you again, unless you have a system in place, you have to. If you want to say we're gonna police our own, you need that in place before you just disarm. I'm not, and like I said, forces outside are not just them. It's also people that don't want us to have these same white supremacists that are not in the government, that are outside our community. They would give them.
What about the ones in the police department?
Okay, what about the ones not in the police department?
I don't understand.
So you disarm the police. You think that the problem is just going to go away?
No,
Once you disarm the police. No, I'm asking you. So again, if there's nothing in place to replace them, nothing in place to protect.
Okay, but implicit in your language is the idea that police are actually a net good in society. They actually do what their job description says.
Well, we know that that's not the case.
We know that that's not the case. I don't. I'm making a structural and systemic argument. I'm saying that the police function in practice in the same way that slave overseers function, and that's actually where policing came from. It came from the Fugitive Slave Act, which deputized white people to go after black runaways and send them back to the plantation. That is a literal function. That is a literal function of the police, and that's the function that they serve today. They serve to corral us. They serve as an intermediary to either kill us or to corral us into prisons at astronomical rates. Again, when we talk about the disproportionate crime sentencing, that's because that's the disproportionate police attention, Herschel. And again,
if we form a neighborhood watch, because it's done in other ethnic communities, and they police their own, they don't have to.
My problem is, Herschel. Again, like I was saying, my problem is that implicit in your argument is the police do what's in their job description. I'm saying that is literally not the case, and it's never historically been the case.
I'm not. What I'm saying is there are no absolute. You're making what you're saying is an illegitimate argument. Because you're making an absolute argument, and it's not absolute. You're making an absolute. You just said that the police don't do their job or what they're supposed to.
No, I'm saying that their job description is not. Their job description is not to serve or protect the community. Their job description is ethnic population control. That is a fact. That is an empirically observable fact.
No.
No.
That's the way it's practiced.
Okay.
So you're telling me. So when I called them, I was stupid to call them because they didn't do what I needed them to do.
You were lucky. That's what it was. You were lucky because there have been plenty of black men in your position that have done the exact same thing and got shot in the face for it.
And wait. Make up my mind. You said it was only about 1,000 a year.
Again, you don't die from every shooting. And like I was saying before, the police is not actually obliged to document who it kills. Journalists.
That's what I said.
No, that's what I said.
I said that they don't document everything.
The police are not obliged to document every kill that they make. So the statistics I'm using aren't collaborated by any federal department because there's no law forcing them to actually document when they kill somebody. That's done by journalists. So there's actually a sincere risk that is being way undercounted.
It is being undercounted.
And also, it only applies to people who are killed. You can be shot and not die. So again, my argument is this: we have to take these structural and systemic arguments. If we think it's systemically true that police are racist, that police are against us, that police are corralling us, or that police are contributors to mass incarceration and our deaths, if we think that's true, we have to take it to our logical conclusion and say that it doesn't make sense to agree that they should have the level of privilege that they have, where they're allowed to both carry weapons and use them with impunity, because one is going to follow the other.
I just know for a fact there are no absolutes, and you're making an absolute argument that every cop is going to. When I say that America is a white supremacist country, it is. It's a fact. It's an absolute fact, regardless of any exception. When I say America is a white supremacist country, we're all Americans in this room. I'm not saying we're white supremacists. The general argument, the universal argument, actually already accounts for the exceptions, which is, so when I'm saying the same thing about police, the police is a white supremacist institution imposing white control over ethnic populations that it doesn't want.
That is a factual statement that doesn't actually change if you find those random good cops.
You said 1,000 people are killed. Again,
killed that we know of.
That we know, right?
That we know of, and that aren't, they could be shot, but they may not be fatally shot. And then, it's also not corralling. Again, everybody that dies in prison, everybody that dies in jail, they didn't just volunteer themselves in jail.
You're right, but what about the ones? But
armed police put them there.
Okay.
And that's
so. What
also
about
not
so you're discounting the ones that don't get killed. You're discounting the ones that don't get beat up. The ones that don't get shot. Again, I'm not making an argument in favor of. I'm just saying you can't make an absolute blanket statement because you're making an absolute statement that all police and all policing is wrong.
Okay.
Not all are.
Oh my Jesus!
I don't believe that all are.
I
There are some that might actually want to do the right thing, that go there for the right reason.
But if we think policing is fundamentally and structurally white supremacist, going into a white supremacist construct with good intentions will necessarily lead to the replication of that construct. And if you don't replicate it, you will get fired. You will get, something will happen to you on the job. There are, they call it the thin blue wall. The thin blue wall exists because those quote unquote good cops are silent about the bad cops that plant drugs and that they know plant drugs. And if they're loud about it, they know that they have to quit or they're going to die. So, again, the circumstance is when we're in something that's structurally one way, when you're in something that's structurally malignant, your individual good intentions are actually irrelevant to the function of that system.
Unless
just like with America.
If you have,
we can be as pro-black as we want. America's still going to be a white supremacist state, Herschel.
It is. It is.
Same with policing.
But again,
same with the FBI that tried to get Martin Luther King to commit suicide. And same with ICE.
It's the same, but
it's law enforcement. That's law enforcement. But we can't take that conclusion. We can't internalize that conclusion. And then on the other hand, we can't internalize the conclusion that these institutions are structurally racist and structurally violently racist, and also say that the instrument of their violence is something that we should defend and maintain. I'm saying that we shouldn't.
I didn't say that we should defend or maintain. I'm saying there has to be. Wait a minute. You said disarm them today. If there's not something in place by that community, lawlessness will break out. The same way they came in and took land from people. I mean, the government is doing it now, right?
The government is, again, the police operate as a gag. Police facilitate that lawlessness.
You think some of these people down here wouldn't try to force out some of these black folks? The police, I'm not in a mental place where I'm assuming that the police are protecting me from that. Antoine, I hear you. I hear you.
It's one of those days, y'all. It's one of those days. It's one of those days.
Me. Antoine been in the ooey again. He been in the ooey.